When you're in a toxic relationship, even early on, there's a certain feeling you get when something's off. Like when the other person is smiling, but their eyes didn't seem to get the memo. You know what I'm talking about? Or an uneasiness that hits when you're apart from this person. Like the connection is only strong when you're right there holding it together. But instead of trusting those feelings, you tell yourself you're anxious or insecure because that's what you were taught to do. But those reactions you explained away were actually your body's way of warning you that something wasn't safe. And they were easy to ignore at first because they were subtle. Those reactions build slowly over time through repeated exposure. And that's why the longer you stay in contact, the harder it is to ignore what your body is trying to tell you. So if you've been feeling that way, but you couldn't explain why, let's go ahead and get into all those little red flags that you were taught to ignore. It's all going to start to come together and make a whole lot of sense, I promise you. My name is Christina, and I help people untangle from toxic relationships, build trust in their instincts, and finally move on. If you're still feeling stuck, I've created a quiz that can help. It's designed to show you exactly where you are in the healing process and what to focus on next. You'll find a link for that below. Now let's get to the first red flag, because this one shows up quietly. And it's usually the first thing you talk yourself out of. You were always a little on edge, but you convinced yourself it was just chemistry. So at first, it probably didn't feel like a red flag. It was the kind of intensity that makes you feel seen, maybe even chosen. And when your chest tightened or your thoughts started racing, you didn't see that as a problem. You told yourself it was attraction, that you were just nervous, that this is what it felt like when a connection really meant something. But what you were actually feeling was unpredictability, because there were some days where they were fully present. They were warm, attentive, and almost magnetic. And other days, it was like you lost them. They were cold, distracted, maybe hard to reach. And they never really explained the shift. So you did it for them, as we do so many times in these relationships. You filled in the gaps, made excuses, and tried to stay in sync. And without realizing it, your body started to adjust. You started scanning for signals, racing just a little, staying close enough to stay connected. And maybe you told yourself this was just a part of falling for someone. But the truth is, your system never really powered down. And that feeling that felt like anxiety, maybe it wasn't because you were falling in love. Maybe it actually was anxiety because part of you was already bracing for the emotional whiplash. So the next red flag you were taught to ignore is you felt like you had to explain your emotions. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice they never had to explain theirs, did they? So maybe something they said didn't sit right, or they went cold for a few days. And when you brought it up, they acted like you were making a big deal out of nothing. And instead of feeling heard, you found yourself explaining. You explained why you felt that way, why you weren't trying to start a fight, or why it was actually kind of hurtful, even if they didn't mean it that way. And at first, they probably didn't raise their voice. They didn't attack you. They just plain didn't get it. And because they weren't being outwardly aggressive, you started questioning whether your feelings were valid at all. And that's the part no one warns you about. The kind of dismissal that doesn't look like abuse on the surface. It looks like a calm conversation where you're the one doing all the emotional work. And over time, your body starts to carry that weight, especially when it's a consistent pattern. So you walk into the conversation already trying to soften it. Your chest tightens before you even open your mouth. And you hold your breath a little, hoping they won't shut down or turn it around on you. And it's subtle, but it builds. And before you know it, you've trained yourself to over-explain everything just to keep the connection from slipping away. And so again, just to reiterate, even though it's not always yelling and it's not always a huge explosion, it is always dismissing your feelings and turning anything that you might feel you need to get off your chest into something that becomes too much or something that becomes your fault. So, what we're talking about here are consistent patterns. So, now let's talk about the next red flag. You started feeling drained even when things were going well. So, there were good moments. We have to admit that, right? There were times when the other person was warm, present, and engaged, when it finally felt like you were getting somewhere. And during those moments, you showed up, you stayed present, and you gave it your full attention. Maybe you did it because you didn't know how long this good time would last. And afterwards, you didn't feel calm. You felt wiped out, drained. But you didn't take space like you might have wanted to, because alone time didn't feel restful. It felt risky. Like if you pulled back, they might take it as rejection, or worse, disappear completely. So you stayed close, even when your body was begging for a break. And maybe part of you hoped that if you could just soak up enough of the good, it would carry you through whatever came next. But that's not how it works, because even the good times required emotional work. You were still tracking their moods and still adjusting to them, still trying to keep things light, easy, and connected. It was all effort. So your nervous system never got a break. And when even rest starts to feel like a threat, your body learns to survive on tension, even when everything looks fine on the surface. And here's another red flag that you were trained to ignore. You stopped reacting. And you probably told yourself that meant that the waters were finally calm. So the first time they crossed a line, maybe it was a lie, maybe it was something worse. It hit hard. Those things always do. But it wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal. And in that moment, you were sure, this isn't something I will ever put up with. But then it happened again. And each time, it felt a little less sharp. It was still wrong, it was still painful, but the edges were kind of dulled. And it's easy to mistake that for progress, to think maybe you've gotten stronger, that you're finally learning to let things go. But there's a difference between healing and shutting down. Because when nothing gets resolved and your body knows it's not safe to react the same way again, it adapts. The reaction gets smaller, not because it doesn't matter, but because reacting hasn't led you to repair. So you stop expecting things to be different. You lower the emotional volume and you stay quiet, not out of peace, but because feeling the full weight of it over and over became too much. And the longer you stay in that place, the harder it is to know what you're actually feeling. Because now numbness feels normal. So now we're going to talk about a red flag that's kind of like a culmination of all of these red flags, when these things are left unchecked. And you can kind of look at it as the ultimate red flag, but it's still a red flag because it's not too late. You can still do something about this one. So this red flag is that your body started sending warning signs you couldn't ignore anymore. So maybe it started with the basics. You were tired all the time. You were wired, but completely depleted. Or maybe it was something bigger. Maybe you got a diagnosis, a flare-up, a chronic issue that no one could fully explain. It's super common with survivors of narcissistic abuse. But all along leading up to this, it's not like you felt constantly stressed. You'd already adjusted. So maybe you thought you'd been handling things pretty well. I know I've been there myself. But the truth is, your body's been waving red flags for a while. The tension, the sleep issues, the disconnection from yourself. All of that happens in the early stage. And this red flag we're talking about now is what happens when those warning signs go unacknowledged for too long. Because your body isn't just reacting to emotional chaos in the moment. It's responding to the long-term pattern, the constant override of your instincts, and the way you had to shrink and silence yourself just to stay connected. The way you stopped expecting repair and started internalizing the damage. So there's some research linking long-term emotional stress to immune dysfunction, gut disruption, and even risk for conditions like autoimmune diseases and certain cancers. And if you're experiencing something like this, and I have myself, it doesn't mean that it's your fault by any means, but we can take it as a sign that the body is getting loud enough that it's time to listen. And so here's the good news. If you're dealing with any of this right now, it's not too late to start listening because the same way stress accumulates, healing does too. And the moment you stop ignoring the red flags, even the physical ones, you give your system a chance to do what it's been trying to do all along, to protect you. So maybe the red flags didn't look like danger at first. Maybe they showed up as discomfort or confusion or exhaustion you just couldn't explain. But your body noticed. And the longer you stayed, the louder those warning signs got. And that doesn't make you weak. It means you adapted, exactly like you were taught to do. But now that you can see it more clearly, you get to respond differently. You get to stop explaining away what you've already felt and start trusting the signs for what they are. So I highly encourage you to take this as your sign right here and now to start your own healing journey. Even if you've been out of this relationship for years, if you've never fully processed what's happened and you haven't made time to take care of yourself, take this as your sign to do that now. And in the meantime, if you want to understand how the narcissist kept you from seeing those signs in the first place, watch this video next, because it wasn't just that the red flags were hard to spot. It was how carefully they worked to get past your defenses. But before you go, be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already, and I will see you again soon.